It's Thursday afternoon, 5 p.m. in Central Europe and 2 p.m. in Canada, noon in Canada, and it's Space Café Canada time. Our Space Café Canada by Dr. Jessica West with her guest Hira Nadeem will begin very soon. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback, and we will learn and improve based on your feedback. I'm Elena Vocale, event coordinator at SpaceWatch.Global. SpaceWatch.Global is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activity in a geopolitical context. First things first, I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keep our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. In case you want to join the supporter team, be aware that it is just a click away from you on our website. I know many of you are familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. The latest one features Nicholas Edmond, acting director of the well-known UNOSA UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, exploring the essentiality of international cooperation when it comes to space exploration. We also have new exciting episodes of Space Café Radio. The latest episode with Andreas Lindenthal, about the Munich Security Conference, and Victor Danches of Endurosat. Among other things, Thorsten and Victor talked about the Tolliman mission that wants to answer to the question, could life survive around the nearest stars? How cool is that? If you haven't done so yet, check out our fresh new podcast series, The Space Economy Insights by Kevin O'Connell and Dr. Emma Gatti. You'll find this and all our audio series wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to become a space watcher and don't know about it with your cool t-shirt or mug, visit our fan shop and it is open. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive on our webpage in the event section. And of course, we're on YouTube. Please note that we will host Space Café Canada live regularly. With that, my job is done, and I'd like to hand over to your host today. Jessica, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Space Café Canada. I'm joining you from Project Plowshares, which is a Canadian Peace and Research Institute that has been engaged in global space discussions for the past 2 decades. We are located at the University of Waterloo, which is on the Haldimand Tract, land that was granted to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River, which is part of the territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. Now, today our discussion is focused on diversity and inclusion in Canada's space economy. Here at Space Café Canada, we have previously had the privilege to speak with Brian Gallant from Space Canada about the exciting new commercial initiatives that are taking root here. We've spoken with one of Canada's most well space enterprises, MDA, maker of the iconic Canadarm, as well as Maritime Launch, which is building the first commercial spaceport in Canada. So amid this flurry of activity, both here and worldwide, we commonly hear that there is a global war for talent, a lot of competition for hiring the best and the brightest. Many people in the talent pool navigating a career in the space industry is challenging. Here with me today is Hira Nadeem. She is leading efforts to help diversify Canada's space industry and make it more accessible to everyone. Hira is the first Canadian to receive a Brooke Owens Fellowship, which is an American initiative aimed at boosting aerospace careers for exceptional young women and other gender minorities. Building on this opportunity, she co-founded the Zenith Canada Pathways Foundation, and with her team has developed the Zenith Fellowship, which provides internship as well as mentorship opportunities in the space sector to students and young professionals from underrepresented groups right across Canada. She's joining us here today from San Francisco, where Hira is currently working as a space systems engineer at Planet on the SkySat missions operations team. Very exciting. And I have to add, Hira is just about to defend her thesis on machine learning applications for autonomous robotic systems for future space exploration missions, which is part of a master's degree of engineering science at Western University's Institute for Earth and Space Exploration, which I'm happy to say is just down the highway from me in London, Ontario. Welcome to Space Café Canada, Hira, and thank you for taking time early in the morning to be with me here today.
Hello, thank you.
So I do want to spend a bit of time talking about you because I think it's valuable to hear about our guests and the experiences that they bring to the space sector. So you're just about to graduate from the Institute for Earth and Space Exploration at Western. Congratulations. I was hoping you could tell us a bit about what brings you to space and what brings you to the Institute.
Yeah, I think the question of what brings me to space is a long journey, but I think for a lot of people it starts the inspiration that space gives you, from a young age. I wasn't the kind of person who was really interested in being an astronaut particularly, which is the common one, mostly because I'm afraid of roller coasters, and rockets and roller coasters are kind of the same thing. So, but I always was really inspired by the people on the ground who were working together to, get that rocket into space, get those astronauts to the ISS, and wanted to contribute in some way. So I pursued engineering as that's what I heard was the best way to do space, and aerospace engineers were all the rage to do space things, and I thought I should do that. Being up in Hamilton, Ontario, McMaster University just being right there. No aerospace program, but I did electrical engineering, and I really learned from within that program that there's a lot of applications for electrical engineers to contribute to space projects. So after my undergrad, I'd done a lot of extracurriculars in kind of space, which we'll probably talk about a lot today. But basically, the advice I got as an electrical engineer who wanted to work on things like missions to the moon or to Mars was that I should get a better background in some of the science and understanding, science and what the environment of space can do to the electronics that I would want to be working on, or kind of the applications. So I learned about Western University, which is the school with the science program at the Institute for Earth and Space Exploration. And so I was very fortunate to be accepted and be able to work on some really cool projects, one of which is to do some lunar rover space exploration with machine learning.
I mean, that's the top of excitement next to astronaut, I would say, which I love your story. My children are at school right now, but I'm going to make them watch this interview because they're also in space, but also really driven to be astronauts. I'm a screamer when it comes to roller coasters and other rides, so they probably get it from me. Yeah. But it's really good to hear that there's so many different ways to connect with space from a variety of different educational backgrounds and career paths. Mm-hmm. And also shout out to all your extracurriculars. Get them to understand the value of that. Yes. So I did introduce you briefly. I also cut out a lot of the experiences that you have had and expertise that you bring to the sector. So we've given a quick snapshot of Hira. What are some of your best experiences in the space sector? Some of the personal highlights for you beyond Western, of course?
Oh yeah, for sure. So in the beginning of my career at McMaster, like I was mentioning, I really didn't know how to connect electrical engineering, which, a lot of people know that electrical engineering at that time, that there's applications for space, but I wasn't aware of them. So I was like, oh, well, if I'm not in robotics or I'm not in aerospace, then how am I gonna do space? And so I started to look for ways to be involved in space. And some of the highlights for me were working with the Planetary Society as an outreach coordinator. That kind of got me tapped into the space sector globally a little bit, and advocacy in general. And then from there, kind of being involved with Planetary Society, moving into working with Zenith Canada. That was amazing, just being on the board, being able to connect with students from across the country and learning about ways that they wanted to engage with the space sector, and seeing a lot of my own struggles and the struggles that these students are having. I think it was a very big spot for me where I learned about all the things that I do later, and kind of drove me and a lot of my career. So yeah, working with Zenith Canada has been a huge highlight. So if anyone's watching, has heard of SETS Canada, if you're a student or a young professional, definitely get involved with them. And if you're someone with money, definitely go give them some money to support their projects. And also, I was very fortunate to go to a lot of conferences in Canada. I think Canada is really great for conferences. There's such great people in the space sector in general, and Canada has a very small space sector, so everyone kind of knows everyone. And I just love that community of like, you go to one conference and the same person's at the conference, and it's just kind of like catching up. So I was really fortunate to be able to go to space conferences. A big, it was the Canadian Space Summit in Ottawa, if anyone remembers that one, back before the pandemic. And that was actually where I learned about my first space job, which was Sinclair Interplanetary in Toronto, which was another big highlight in the Canadian space sector. They were the first people to give me a shot at working in space with no space background. A big thing I've learned over the years, a lot of employers like is that you have some exposure to space in some way. And I didn't at the time, like aside from working on a CubeSat project, which all the things I've done in Canada have been a huge highlight for me. So I worked on a CubeSat project, which just launched last week through the Canadian CubeSat Project with the CSA. But yeah, aside from just working on that project, they gave me a shot. I worked with them for a summer, and that was life-changing for me because they like really nurtured my development as an engineer, as a person in space, really taught me everything that I know of the space environment. And they even took me to SmallSat in Utah, which like opened so many doors for me. I learned about Planet for the first time. I had no idea what this company was in the US. I didn't know about half the small sat companies, the rocket companies that were taking people to space or satellites to space and enabling the small sat workforce. But I also learned about this little fellowship called the Brooke Owens Fellowship from that conference. And I was really inspired by this fellowship that was for women in aerospace. I think that part of the Brooke Owens Fellowship, going to SmallSat, being a part of Sinclair, that 1 year in 2019, that was like a really big year for me, and really opened so many doors. So yeah.
I was at Space Summit as well, but I didn't meet you there.
Oh, wow. You must have crossed paths.
We must have. And I also fondly remember it. So, oh my goodness, you've done a lot, which is really impressive. And you definitely stand out as one who has successfully navigated both like an education, I think, and then as well as leveraged that into an early career in the space industry. But that doesn't mean it's been easy. And you mentioned, struggles that others have had in the industry in your previous response. So what kind of obstacles do young professionals face in Canada? Or are there specific challenges that you've dealt with along the way that others might not appreciate, especially those who are more established?
Yeah, I think like the big one that I struggled with, and then I think I've seen a lot of students struggle with, has been this awareness aspect of what is going on in the space sector in Canada. And I think that's changed significantly in the past like 5 years since I entered university. I think it's been longer, but since I started in the space sector, which was not that long comparatively to a lot of other people. And I think that also a big struggle has been like who can be a part of the space sector. Like it's changed a lot in terms of what kind of engineering. Like I said, there was not a lot of awareness about people outside of aerospace working in space. Like I knew they existed now, but people were not really talking about it and sharing their experiences. So as a young woman in like a non-specific like aerospace sector engineering degree, like how are you gonna if you don't hear about it? So I think it's the same thing now, more so that there are students from non-engineering backgrounds who want to work in space, and they don't really know what they can be doing, because people like really, you go to apply for a job and they're all engineering roles, and you go to apply to the CSA, it's all engineering roles, and people are just saying like, unless you have an engineering degree, like you're not going to work in space. Whereas like in other countries, even this credentialism is kind of also starting to go away. That like, it's about skill sets, specifically like, if you have strong software engineering skills, but you're not a software engineer and you're a physicist who really did a lot of Python in your work, like, why can't you also do that job? Like, why do you have to have that degree? So I think that's been a struggle for a long time for a lot of students and young professionals entering the industry. And yeah, I think like education is important. I think, getting a degree is very important, having that experience and then applying that knowledge. But I think that the weight that we put on where you go to school and how your grades are and all this stuff, and like what degree you did, that's been a constant barrier for a lot of students entering space. I actually failed math in my second year. As I mentioned, I did a lot of extracurriculars, not only space, I was also doing creative endeavors. I was a slam poet in my second year of university, and I loved it, but it took a lot of time and effort for me. The work was great, and honestly, if I hadn't done that, I don't think I'd be a decent public speaker. But it was a great experience. But because a lot of my focus was on developing my skills within the classroom, but also outside, and I'm not a great person at testing. Like, I get anxiety, I get stressed. I'm really good at project-based learning, but I'm not the best at like a high anxiety stress test situation. And so I ended up failing math in my second year, and I thought, oh man, my career is over. Like, no one's going to hire me. And I think a lot have the same fear of like one bad grade on your report card going to cause you to lose out on opportunities. And sometimes, like, we see it still with employers, is that they'll see a transcript that has, consistent grades, but they're a little bit lower, or they have like high grades at some point, most points, and then one semester is bad. And I think sometimes it just like they mark it off and just say, okay, move on to the next. I get it. It's competitive, but I think that we should look at other things. But I found that, I struggled a lot with academics at times in terms of testing, and I was really good at projects. And that did shine through with a lot of the networking I did and the way I talked to people and employers, and they gave me a chance to work with them. But there's other struggles as well, obviously, as being a woman, not seeing a lot of female role models in the industry, and then especially women of color, and then also being in a school where, engineering is male dominated. So most of my class was men, most of my profs were men, and then I'd be in the lab and I'd want to do something, or, I'd be asking a question and I would be made to feel that I should know the answer, even though the guys were also asking the same question, but it felt like more scrutiny being a woman, not knowing the answer. And I've learned in industry that it's fine to ask a question, like, well, how are you going to learn if you don't ask? And so I think, the environment at times could be a bit difficult. So finding a community of other women has been very helpful. So,
I like that. I also find that helpful in my own career, networking with other women in the industry. We're not engineers for the most part, though. I tend to work with the policy people. So I feel even more anxiety when it comes to what skills do you have. I really appreciate you sharing that you failed math. I think we don't talk enough about the obstacles that we face along the way, but also the things we learn from failure. And this is something I try to tell my kids. They're not in primary school. And there's also that sense of, taking a wrong step or making a mistake rather than growing as a person. So I appreciate that. But I do want to talk really briefly about the Brooke Owens Fellowship, because this is a big deal. You are the first Canadian to be a recipient of the fellowship. And it also inspired the work that you've been doing in the nonprofit sector. So if you can quickly tell us, like, what does it mean to be a Brookie? And I know that term from other women in the US.
Yes. So the Brooke Owens Fellowship was created in 2016, 2015 around, after a few friends lost their best friend, Dawn Brooke Owens. So people might know Lori Garver, ex-deputy administrator of NASA, Cassie Lee Colderbrantz, who works with Lockheed Martin now, actually is working with her own organization called The Sound Future, and Will Pomerantz, who was VP of special projects at Virgin Orbit. So these people who are big names in space all got together and really wanted to honor their friend Dawn Brooke Owens and created the Brooke Owens Fellowship to help encourage more women to get into space, because she was a big trailblazer in the aerospace community. And she was also very creative and very, she DJ'd, she was a very cool person. And so they wanted to help cultivate more people in the industry like her. And so, basically what they do is they connect women to and gender minorities to internships in the space sector, specifically in the US. They provide a mentor to help guide them on their journey through their internship and also beyond. And then they also highlight a community. So each year the fellows grow, like there's a new class each year, and the classes all get to know each other over the years. And so this community has grown. It's like over 200 people now. And it's just like a really great community. So being a Brookie is not just about like academic excellence and like, being able to do a job, but it's also about, like I said, Brooke Owens was a very creative, quirky human. And so they look for the Brookie aspect and like, are these people like, do they have that Brookiness factor? So that's why we're all Brookies. We say we're not a cult, we're a little bit of a cult, but we're all like these, really creative, passionate individuals who want to do something in space and want to drive the industry forward towards a future that we want to see. So yeah, I'm really happy to be a Brookie, and there's actually 2 new Canadian Brookies this year who have joined. So it's really nice to see that more international opportunities are being made possible, because yeah, it really helped my career, and I think it's going to help a lot of people going forward.
So was this your initial connection to Planet was through the Brooke Owens Fellowship?
Oh, yes. Okay.
So what does the fellowship do? I mean, it's not, I was calling it an award. It's not an award.
Yeah. So they basically, how it works is like you apply and then you go through a process. They vet you. So the fellowship vets you, and then they match you to a host company. And so they have like 40 companies, but as an international student applying to Brooke Owens Fellowship, there's like only like a handful of companies that actually accept international applicants, as we all know, ITAR and laws and things like that, and visas. So I only had actually there were, at my time when I was applying, there's like only 4 companies that I could work at, and one was engineering, which was Planet. And so I was only matched to Planet. And so Planet had to interview me, and they had other applicants that they were interviewing. And so they had to make the assessment that if they wanted to hire me. And so I was very fortunate that through this competitive process, they wanted to hire me. And so this was also the pandemic year. So I was class of 2020. And I'm supposed to go to this internship in the summer in June of 2020. And then obviously also live in San Francisco and do my job and then come back. And I think what really showed me that Planet was a great company was that they wanted me to have the experience of coming to the office and seeing Planet in its entirety. And they really recognized that I'm an international applicant, and that like me not being able to get a visa was a very likely scenario. And actually ended up being the case, is that I could not get a visa for the summer. So they pushed my internship to the fall, and they paid for my flight, they paid for my apartment, they flew me out to work at Planet in the fall, and the lab where I got to touch satellites and watch them launch shortly after. So it's a really great community of like companies who foster this EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, and really do try to make the experience for these women who are working with them a good one.
So that sounds fantastic, and I'm so glad to hear positive stories from the pandemic. You're the co-founder and president of Zenith Canada Pathways Foundation. Is that linked to your experience with the Brooke Fellowship?
Yes.
What does Zenith do and how did it come about?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it is basically we've established it as almost like a sister organization at Brooke Owens. It does follow off the model very closely to the Brooke Owens Fellowship. And basically the people who work on the Zenith Canada Pathways with me, we all came from different areas in the space sector, different experiences, different work, and yeah, we all have the same issue, is that, we have seen the space industry grow, but we're also struggling to find ways of, connecting students and just like ourselves having a hard time finding meaningful places that we belong within the space sector. And, if you're from Ontario, it's like really everyone's next door to you if you're from Quebec, but there's this constant thing of like, if you're anywhere else, it's a bit difficult. So we had seen this it changed slowly, and we were just, we've seen the Brooke Owens Fellowship. I had just, started my Brookie adventure, and even when I was applying, I was like, why don't we have this in Canada? I actually thought about, at the Canadian Space Summit, I started talking to people. I was like, I'm applying to this fellowship and I don't know if I'm going to get it, but would you support something like this in Canada? And so the conversations had started all across the country, I think, slowly. And it just took a few dedicated volunteers who wanted to get this started. So we basically adapted the program very closely to the Brooke Owens Fellowship. We made some changes, obviously, to adapt it to the Canadian market. Canada is a bit different. We don't have like 40 companies that we can engage like the Brooke Owens Fellowship, but we had a lot of passionate people, a lot of people who wanted to see the next generation grow, a lot of companies still who wanted to, participate and foster this community and work with like making more inclusive spaces within the space sector. So we basically do the same thing. We have internships, we provide mentors, and then we also have this community. So we're in our second year. And a big change that we've done from the Brooke Owens Fellowship. So basically, if you apply to the Brooke Owens Fellowship and you get an internship, you're a fellow. The problem with that for us is that, all of our jobs are engineering, most all of them. I think now we have like one that's business, which is great. But that wouldn't work for us because we knew a lot of students across Canada who were not just engineers. And so we made the decision to include a second class of like not just interns, but also just mentees. So we would provide everything the fellowship has to offer aside from the internship, because we would select these students and say, like, you guys are great. If you get a job, you're an intern. If you don't, we'll still give you a mentor, and we'll still keep you in the community and foster your growth. And so that was great. We did that last year. We had 10 interns, but we had 11 mentees, who, actually most of them got jobs in the space sector outside of our fellowship or found paths to grad school or something. So it was really like amazing to see like this growth that we saw and this change that we saw in a lot of these careers.
So you've just accepted your second round of fellows, and I'm assuming also mentees?
Yes, so fellow interns and fellow mentees.
What's involved in selecting students? Who are you finding? And I don't know, what does this look like? What does the class of 2023 look like? And how did you find them?
Yeah, so a lot of outreach. I think it was really great to have that first class. The first time it was a little harder because people didn't really know what we were doing. We kept being like, do you know about Brooke Owens? And they're like, maybe. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. And so it was a lot of outreach and kind of like explaining what we were doing. And so we connected with schools across Canada. We really focused our efforts on schools not in Ontario and Quebec only. So we did a lot of outreach to the central provinces, to the Maritimes, to the West Coast. We also tried to get some recruitment in the territories. And it's a big country. There's a lot of communication. So we have some pretty great efforts from our recruitment team to send emails. I would just like to highlight, if you know Sam Condi, she has sent thousands of emails and connections across across the networks to try to get students. And actually very much there's a lot of students who were like, Sam, you texted me or told me about this through LinkedIn and I applied, and they're fellows now. So yeah, really big recruitment effort to try to get students and go to conferences now and talking to students and events and things like that. But yeah, it was great to have our first class, our pilot class, who really believed in us and took a shot at what we were doing. And now they do our recruitment with us, and they tell people that they know, or they talk to their schools and spread the word. And so we've seen, we've seen it grow in terms of our outreach this year as well, and hoping each year onwards we see more. So
who are some of the companies that are providing the internship opportunities with Zenith?
Yeah, so we
might as well do some shout outs.
Yeah, exactly. We've had some great companies work with us. Some really awesome ones like Wyvern in Alberta. They're a great company. Sinclair Interplanetary in Toronto. We've had who are now a part of Rocket Lab, which was pretty cool to be a part of. Last year we had GHGSat. This year again we have Mission Control Space. A new company we have this year is Avalon Space, Euroconsult, as well as Canadian Space Mining Corps. So yeah, there's a lot of great companies, a lot of companies who wanted to get involved as well. And, we're trying to work with them in some way to engage them further and bring them on again, maybe next year. So yeah, if you're a company who wants to hire an awesome student or young professional, because we aren't just students, we also give opportunities to new grads, let us know, give me an email.
Well, let's talk about the different ways that people can become involved, because I think it's exciting, but I want to acknowledge the fact that you are not just dealing with just with students or just with young people, perhaps, because I know this is also a struggle in the industry. A lot of people come to space later and fall through the cracks because you're not in your early 20s pursuing a career. So I think that's great as well. But how do we get involved, especially different ways of being involved?
Yes, so there's a few ways. So if you're a student or a recent graduate, you can apply to the fellowship, and you can either become a fellow intern or a fellow mentee. And either one I think is really beneficial. A lot of our fellow mentees have contacts into our our host organizations. So we find ways to connect them. So we've seen like some of our fellow mentees from last year work at our host companies here. So there's a lot of great ways. So, apply each year around September, end of August, we open the application. So stay connected, check out our socials, and we'll be posting updates about that coming soon. And then if you're someone who's a company, you can reach out to us to work with us and take on an intern. Our companies are really great because they do really believe in the mission of supporting these students and providing a space for them that is safe and welcoming to all different types of backgrounds. And if you want to be a mentor, say that you have lots of insight and you want to distill that down to students or early career professionals, then you can be a mentor. We have 23 mentors this year. So each year we're looking for more. Sometimes people only join for years. We've had a couple that are stayed around for 2 and probably again next year as well. So engage. And then there's other ways too of just like supporting us, speaking to our students if there's something cool you'd like to share with them, or a workshop or something. We'll find ways. We're very creative. So yeah.
Conferences are also coming to mind. Providing opportunities and access.
Exactly.
That seems important. Okay, so I have to keep the menteeship thing in mind. Mind you, I'm not super well connected in the industry. But you mentioned that the employers you're working with are committed to the mission of providing safe and welcoming environments. So I do want to transition into that bigger picture of diversity inclusion. It's definitely, a catchphrase, not just in the space industry, kind of everywhere. But it's more than, a fellowship or a scholarship. It really is something that needs to be put into practice everywhere. And that includes the workplace. So what are some of the ways that a workplace might be inaccessible or unwelcoming to young people, to women, to minorities in the industry, to newcomers to the industry that we might not be aware of?
Yeah, I think there are changes, and people are talking about creating more inclusive spaces within the workplaces. But I think like a big one for a lot of women or people from underrepresented backgrounds is like feeling like you're represented and that you're valued. So, yeah, like I mentioned with engineering, it is very much a male-dominated industry. It still is very male-dominated. And I think a lot of women have a hard time entering spaces where they are the only woman within their team, or, they're led by all men, up and up and up. Every level is all men. Even in my experiences at internships, not even just in the space sector, but outside in engineering, my whole team was men, and like the only women were interns, and those interns, they leave. So while it may seem like you're bringing in diversity by hiring the diverse classes of interns, it's about cultivating and having that long-term representation and at every level. So I'm very fortunate right now that my manager is a woman, and my team lead above that and the management is also a woman, and that I constantly am seeing strong women leading decisions in engineering meaningfully. They're not there as like look, we've filled our diversity quota. They're genuinely like very capable women. And, it makes me realize that, oh, I can do that. Like, if they've been able to, then they felt comfortable and safe in this environment, then there's a way for me to do that. And I think that's something that helps at every level. Like if you're making a space for people who are different than you, everyone is going to feel better as well. Like you're going to be creating spaces for that other people may also have not realized that they needed. A small thing too is like, I was like, this is like very well, but I had not in companies that I worked at, but like in the women's bathroom, like I don't have to go chase around for a pad. Like it's just there, like there's like nice smelling soap, things like it's just very small. It is very much bare minimum, but it's the little things sometimes that build up to really make you feel comfortable in that you as a person can exist in this space. So I think it extends beyond just like women, and it's also to a lot of different underrepresented groups within these spaces. And it's just about like really asking people what they want and like, are you comfortable? Is there anything that's wrong? Like being open to it's not criticism. It's just dialogue about like, I can make this a better environment for you. And I think that openness, it goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, mentorship is coming through again as another theme, I think, throughout our conversation. And your response reminded me of, being in my 20s when I first started going to conferences. And, I'm a woman working on peace issues, and it would mostly be men from the military, and trying to fit in or feel confident. Yeah, it was really hard. And I want to do my own shout out, I think, to Teresa Hitchens, who's she's at Breaking Defense now, but she's at CDI at the time and has worked at Defense News. But she was really great about, helping build confidence and introducing me to people and showing me that it was actually a welcoming environment and how to fit in. So that resonates, I guess, with finding people who are like you and who aren't there as a token, who are really actually quite influential in their field.
Yes, exactly.
So bathrooms as well. I mean, I know maybe you followed this on social media, but because it was International Women's Day, there were, calls for people to take real action rather than rhetoric on making work environments in particular more welcoming. Were there kind of other ideas that came out of that discussion? I kind of think of it as like diversity by design. How do we design our workplaces to be more diverse?
Yes. I definitely think like a big one that a lot of women echoed is just like meaningful diversity and inclusion. Like, you know, if you have women in your team, support them. Like if the lower ranks are just where your diversity lies, then you're not actually cultivating a community of inclusion. It's just basically just saying, oh, look at my numbers are higher. But if your leadership, if your board is not reflective of that, then really take a critical look at what's going on. This isn't about like what I constantly hear is like, we want the best talent, and we're gonna find the best talent, and that's what we're gonna highlight. And it's wrong, because everyone wants the best talent, but if you're not going to the places where that talent is, or if you're not speaking in a way that attracts all kinds of talent, you're going to keep getting the same people. And that's why you're going to be biased to think, oh, well, every time I do an outreach, I have young white men who come out and want to work here, or I only attract these senior level men to come and work. And it's like, maybe because there are senior level women who do exist, but maybe the environment just doesn't seem right, or it's just as much the decision of the person who is coming to work for you to decide if they want to work there, as much as you need talent. So it's a two-way street. So think about critically, if you're only seeing one type of applicant, why that is. There is something systemically that you might need to change. So I think that was a big thing that a lot of women were talking about on International Women's Day. It's just that, like let's be truthful about this and honest about what we're doing, and make sure that we're actually creating inclusive spaces and not just talking about it every year.
Absolutely. How's Canada doing on this? Are we kind of leading the pack? Are we laggards when it comes to our workplaces and inclusion?
I think honestly that like everywhere is struggling. I think that sometimes it seems like in the States they're really ahead of this, but it's like the US just has a lot of more people, a lot more companies, so it just seems like the impact has been bigger. But I think if you like scale it, we're probably the same boat. We seem to be moving slower in a lot of ways, but I think our tech sector and even our space tech sector is moving along just as well. But yeah, like I see like newer companies where young women are leading the charge. Like I can see very clearly that there is a shift in kind of the way that we're approaching like inclusion, and they are borrowing a lot from the tech sector in general. Two really big ones that I want to shout out are Wyvern, which has two amazing women leading, Kristen Coate and Callie Lissina, and also Magnistar, who's got Jacqueline Good, who's just amazing. An inspiration to me, like just seeing her and what she has done is just amazing. And so it gives me a lot of hope that our private industry is moving towards a good way, because we have these young women who are leading companies, who are creating spaces that are inclusive, because they are taking their experiences and wanting to build great companies. And I also see it in some of the bigger companies. It's a bit slower because I recognize that changing the way things have always been can be difficult, but some teams have done that, where the value has been placed on inclusion and communication and diversity. It is slow. I think like it's slow everywhere, but it doesn't mean that we should keep it slow. I think if more people are motivated and accelerated by this, then we'll see larger changes much more quickly, and not being afraid of change. Like it's not like a bad thing. It's just like, look, there's an issue. People are talking about it. People are wanting to change. Let's adapt. Let's be agile. So yeah.
And I think the pandemic in some ways, because we had it so suddenly and drastically change the way we were working almost overnight. At least my hope is that, we've learned how to grapple with change and to take things on kind of as they come, and to realize that, change is okay. Now we're kind of talking about, diversity, inclusion, the war on talent. So, finding talent, finding the best in a variety of different locations and people with a variety of different educational and racial backgrounds and gender backgrounds is like the first step of that challenge. But, talent retention is a really big issue as well. How do you keep these amazing people once you have found them? And you've had a lot of different work experiences here and in Canada. And I'm curious about what kind of, what makes the difference between a sort of a meh, that was okay. I could work there, to a wow, this is really fantastic. And I mean, right now you're at Planet, you've accepted a full-time job. And so, how do we keep the best and the brightest once we've made that effort to get them into our companies or into our NGOs, if you're me?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've had this conversation with a few people. A lot of them will tell me, a lot of companies will tell me, well, oh, we can't pay the same way that Silicon Valley pays. But like, come on, if I tell you my rent and how much I'm being paid, it's pretty proportional to if you live in Toronto, the rent to like the pay. Though I think in Toronto, you actually get paid less on average. So it's not just about money for these people. Like, I'm not here for the money, believe me. Like, it's good, but it's not like I'm going to stay here forever because they're paying me so much. It's like the job. I feel like I have ownership. And I think that's a big thing for a lot of students, is that I want to go to a place where I'm trusted to do my job. I'm not being forced to do things that have been done like for decades the way that they've been done. Like, I'm empowered to change things that I think could benefit from a bit of change, or I'm empowered to speak up about things that should change. And like, again, like with engineering, things change. With any industry, actually, things change pretty quickly. New things come about, and we're like, oh, we should maybe adapt. And so, giving young people the empowerment that they can lead their own course and own something that at the company, that's like what we're looking for. We're not looking to be handheld. We did school, now we're working professionals, and we want to gain that experience and grow in our careers, and so we want that ownership. And then also, yeah, like, so I say it's not about pay, but it's about like paying us decently well. Like, recognize that if we're moving to Toronto, that the rent is high, and so we should be fairly compensated. Or alternatively, being open to remote work. Canada is a big country. We have a lot of great talent that's not just in Ontario. Like, yes, 50% of Canadians are in Ontario, but or below, like whatever, the 49 parallel. But we got some great talent in Alberta. We have great talent in the Maritimes, in Vancouver, in the prairies, in the territories. Like, tap into it. Not everyone's going to want to move to Toronto or Quebec, like uprooting their families and the place that they've grown up. Like, it's not always feasible. And even within Ontario, some people live more north and they don't want to move all the way down and pay higher rent. Like, being flexible in that way, it goes a long way. Like, ability to work remotely, again, not about the pay. If I'm able to live comfortably and I can work from home and I can come into the office maybe every quarter, like, it's a big benefit. So I think this like adaptability to the way things are moving and tapping into talent all across the country. If you're just looking in Ontario, you're going to get the same talent because you need them to come into the office. So yeah, I think like, yeah, there's a lot of things that young professionals want. Just ask us what we're looking for. And, it's going to be different, but probably a lot of the same answers. So.
Yeah, but you mentioned, I mean, I like that you mentioned where people are from and families and things like that. So I think also that, people are a whole person, not just a job or not just what they do at work.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's also a good reminder. I wasn't going to ask about this, but there's a lot of questions about what you're doing at Planet. So we might as well spend a couple minutes talking about your actual job.
Yeah.
And what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then I'm going to close with
kind of,
Dwayne's question, just so he doesn't think that that I'm ignoring that question, because I think it's a great one, and I think it would be a terrific way to end our discussion. So we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm kind of living my dream job. Like I mentioned early on that I went to Western because I wanted to work on missions and I wanted to gain more background in planetary science in general and things like that. And so for me, the dream has always been to be like that person at mission control, like, you know, with all the screens, and they're like watching things very closely and making sure that whatever we're trying to do in space is happening. So I get to operate satellites, and it's like pretty awesome because these satellites point towards Earth, and we take insights into what's happening on Earth daily. So specifically the SkySats, they are tasking satellites that take, high resolution images of the Earth that provide deeper insights to our customers about, what's going on. And so, yeah, I get to be a satellite operator, and it's really cool. It's very fast paced at times. It's a lot of really cool, like learning about, how things work in space and like how the electronics are affected. And yeah, I just love it a lot. And I can do the operation from my laptop, which is like really cool. And very much like tech industry, Silicon Valley, like things that they've been able to do very quickly. I mean, JPL did the same thing during the pandemic. They all moved to their homes and they were doing all their operations. So yeah, it's really cool that Planet works really quickly. And the thing I love about this job too is that things move really fast, so I can see the life cycle of a mission pretty quickly as well. So yeah, I get to be a space systems engineer. I do space things all day, and yeah, I love my team, and yeah, it's a great time.
So, I mean, what I heard is you are driving satellites from your laptop.
Yeah. They're in space right now. Yeah.
Which introduces a whole different topic that we could have a conversation on another time on, space traffic management. And
yeah,
to me, it just opens up a new window into thinking about that topic, which is something we talk about at the international level, at conferences, and not usually from a driver perspective. But I know driving is not the right word. And yet it brings its own set of connotations and questions with it. That sounds really cool. And again, this was a connection that you made through the Brooke Owens fellowship process.
And I want to note that, like, for me, being a part of the Brooke Owens fellowship really solidified me coming back to Planet. Like having that community, having that support, Planet being so accommodating to me and welcoming to me. And so that's why with Zenith, we're trying to do the same thing. These companies who work with us, they're really showing that they value this, and these students are feeling very supported. And so our hope is that, yes, I left Canada. It doesn't mean I'm gone forever or anything, but I have left Canada at this time, and I'm pursuing my career right now in the US. But our hope is that in the same way that I benefited, that we can have these students benefit and stay in Canada, hopefully, if they choose.
So before we get to our closing question, I realize there's kind of a missing middle in our discussion here, and I think that's the university level. We've talked about what students can do, sort of, and we're going to come back to that. And we've talked about employers in the workforce. What's the role of universities, or how are they doing? What could they do to facilitate, thriving careers in the space industry from people with a variety of different backgrounds?
Yeah, I think I'm going to do a plug to Western. I think Western does a great job of this, is that they also really value student work opportunities. And I think like this is a big thing for students in general, is like getting hands-on with something that they might be interested in, really opens a lot of doors, and like really, makes people think about them in the context of that work. And so Western, as a school, has provided internship opportunities, work study, or like research work within the Institute for Earth and Space Exploration, where professors will have projects for the summer, and these students can come and work on those projects. And I think a lot of universities do these types of things. I think more of them in the context of space would be really helpful. I would highly encourage the schools which don't even have traditional space programs, but have professors who are working on space. For example, at McMaster, I knew a professor very late in the game in my undergrad who was an electrical engineering prof, but was working on RF communication and like making access to the north through like making better communication for satellites. Like, that's super cool. I would have loved to work on that, but I didn't know about it. So I think like highlighting, you know, these schools should highlight these kinds of research opportunities and make them, you know, more wide scale. Like it shouldn't just be the professors, students, or the students that they interact with. Like there should be some kind of outreach, or just awareness. Like I would love to have known that Mac was doing way more space before. But yeah, I think schools have opportunities, they have research, you know, really tap into it. You got students, connect the dots, support your clubs, support the CubeSat projects at your school, give them a little bit of money. It was really great to see the Canadian CubeSat project that the CSA did with the 15 schools across Canada. You know, like I said, a couple of us launched last week. There's a few more launching in a couple of months. So yeah, I think schools can definitely be engaged in that. But yeah, in general, space is just a place. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I was at university, but clubs, that also strikes me as a good way to bring together people that might be interested in a topic, but doing different things at the university, studying different elements of a topic of space, maybe doing slam poetry.
Exactly.
But having an interest and a passion.
Yeah.
So I do think that Dwayne actually read my mind, possibly, and picked one of the more optimistic topics and questions that I wanted to end with, which is, you know, advice. He's asked, what advice would you give to international STEM students seeking space or aerospace related scholarships and internships in the US? But if we're kind of navigating that tricky terrain of A, this is a global industry, but B, maybe I'm in Canada. Any words of advice?
Well, so it really depends on where these international STEM students are seeking these opportunities. So the one that I see that is most open is Brooke Owens Fellowship or the Z Factor Fellowship. So these two fellowships in the US take international applicants from like all across the world. So if you are looking for like a fellowship to connect you to internships, these are the two I would highly recommend, because they work with companies that are open to sponsoring or basically facilitating visas for students coming from abroad. So Brooke Owens had like a student from Morocco last year, a student from Spain, and a couple of a student from Nepal. So looking for these kinds of opportunities. If you're in Canada or Mexico and you want to work in the US, it is a lot easier than if you were from abroad, because of the NAFTA agreement. And I didn't know about this until I worked in the US, but NAFTA is not just about export of goods and import of goods, it's also about export of talent. So US students can work in Canada or Mexico, and Canadians and Mexicans can work in each other's countries and the US as well. So there's a visa class that's a bit more, you know, easy or to get because of this agreement. So that's what I'm on currently, working in the US. And like, we don't be discouraged if you're from Canada and you're like, I want to get the experience working in the States, especially if you're like, oh, I want to take it back to where I am at. In Canada, you know, looking into these kinds of opportunities is really great. In general, I would say if you're an international STEM student who are looking for opportunities in space, go to conferences, like go to the IAC. You know, it's a great conference. I actually met my current manager at IAC. So, you know, you meet a lot of awesome people who are in positions of hiring, or also just awesome friends. So I made a lot of great friends who are from all over the world at the IAC, and like we talk to each other, we're friendly, but we also share opportunities. Like, yeah, I'd say like go to conferences, because that's where you're going to learn the most, and you're going to meet all the right people, or understand where you want to end up. You know, you'll learn a lot of cool things that are happening in space right now that like half the time I didn't even know that was happening until I go to a conference. So because there's always going to be security issues and citizenship, and we have to be cognizant of that. But you never know that there might be opportunities that are coming up. And I know that the US, some of the space sector is becoming more adaptable to that, especially as some of their co-founders or founders are from abroad. And so they want to make it accessible to international applicants. So
well, I think emphasizing conferences is a great way to end. I actually met you at the International Astronautical Congress, which is what IAC stands for, which was in Paris last September. I think it was the first time I participated sort of in the breadth of the conference. I'd gone in and out when it was close by in Toronto and Washington, DC. But I was blown away by, I mean, it's huge, but it's also a showcase for the breadth of space. It's academics, it's employers, it's government. It's engineering, but it's also governance and everything in between. So, and I met a lot of great students that way. And I think if we want to end on another shout out, I think it was Canadian Space Agency also made an effort to try to get students to the IAC. And I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, I would highly recommend the Canadian Space Agency's IAC. I guess it's a program, but basically submit an abstract to these conferences as well. That's actually how I went to IAC, was the CSA. I was a delegate with the CSA. So they don't just do that for IAC, they do that for a couple other conferences. So keep an eye, if you're Canadian, keep an eye on those opportunities. The CSA is a great resource for a lot of these things. So
yeah, so networking, meeting people, developing yourself as a person. You're not just one thing, having lots of different interests. These are all wonderful, I think, pieces of advice for people, even people who are just starting out, but people like me that are, what would I say, halfway through and looking for ways to continue to develop. On that note, I'm going to hand it back to Elena to close us out and say goodbye, but we'll stand by, Elena.
Thank you. Thank you both for this amazing discussion. Before we say goodbye, let me remind you of upcoming events. So on the 28th of March, we're going to have our Space Café 33 Minutes with Dr. Gilles Rabin, who is the advisor to the French Embassy in Berlin. This episode will be on the Franco-German partnership and on how to make Europe fully sovereign and competitive in space. On the 29th of March, we will have the third episode of the Black Ops mini-series with Dr. Namrata Goswami, interviewed by our editor-in-chief, Dr. Emma Gatti. This time, as usual, I would say, they're discussing a hot topic, the Chinese ambitious space strategy. On the 30th of March at 4 p.m. Central European Time and 5 p.m. in Israel, join our Space Café Israel by Meidat Pariente with Ari Asband. And mark your calendars for April's events and stay tuned to know more about them. On the 5th of April, we're going to have our Space Café Italy by Dr. Emma Gatti. And on the day after that, the 6th of April, our Space Café Austria will return with Sabine Pongruber. And on the 12th of April, we're launching a new regional chapter, Space Café Poland by Lukasz Wilczynski. And find and subscribe to our events on Eventbrite. As always, we will love to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to sign up for our daily and our bi-weekly newsletters. And if you want to support more events like this one, go treat yourselves with something special, become a space watcher today, or help us in the supporter program. Thank you all very much for your interest today. Thank you, Jessica, for hosting that inspiring talk. And thanks again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing that great job week by week again. Thank you, our audience, for joining us. I hope to see you in the next events. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a space watcher. Bye.